So we're back. We're back for episode 2, Georgia.
We're back. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Dialogues, episode 2.
You made it back to London in one piece.
I did. I did make it back to London. I did. And as with the time difference, what time is it in Melbourne, Matt? It's like 6 o'clock?
7 p.m., 7:15 p.m.
7, okay. And it's 9 here. So I am just waking up and you were just getting ready for bed.
Well, yeah, soon. I've had a full day at work. I've had a full day at work, so, you know, wind down with the podcast.
Today we are unlocking the cloud mindset.
What is the cloud mindset, Georgia?
Well, I think the power of cloud is not just about the technology itself, but it's in the mindset of those who really lead that change. And as executives, as leaders, your role is obviously critical in steering the organization not only towards cloud adoption, but also, or seamless cloud adoption, but also making sure that we can maximize the absolute potential of cloud. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to unravel those critical questions that every executive should be asking to ensure they are truly unlocking the value of cloud by cultivating the right mindset within their teams.
Those questions, cover different areas and different sort of key pillars, I guess. So we've got strategic alignment, discovering how to align your cloud strategy with your business goals, and leveraging the cloud's power to drive cost savings, scalability, etc., etc. We'll discuss KPIs that matter. Number 2 is risk assessment, so understanding the potential risks and security concerns of cloud migration and learning strategies to mitigate them. So that's super important, especially in these days with all the news about different security incidents and all that, and security breaches that are happening pretty much on a weekly basis, really. And then there's cost management, so exploring the cost optimization strategies and budgeting and forecasting, things like that, and learning how your teams can break down cloud spending by business stream and workload. Talent and skill development, so ensuring your organisation has the skills needed to thrive in a cloud-based world. So discovering why training in cloud fundamentals is not just an option, but really you've got to use that as the whole part of your journey as a catalyst for innovation. And the last one is operational excellence, so witnessing the transformation of operational processes and changing the way you do things to take full advantage around automation and DevOps practices. So those are the kind of the 5 main areas that we'll cover today.
I think it's important to remember that the transition to cloud, it's not just a shift in technology, but it's really a strategic transformation. And the decisions that we make today as leaders will define our company's agility, efficiency, security, and innovation for years to come.
So the first area is around strategic alignment. So some of the questions as a leader in an organisation, you need to ask your leadership, so your managers, your heads of, you got to make sure everyone's aligned. So you've got to ask them, how aligned are they with all the specific business objectives and goals that you're doing as a business, and ensuring that all the work they're doing aligns to that work. So the question, I guess, is having discussions with your team around how cloud can enable cost savings and scalability and reliability. All those sorts of things are super, super important.
I think as well as that, Matt, like being crystal clear with your teams on what the priorities are, and also being willing to be a really active participant in that conversation. Because one thing I see in organizations as they transition to cloud is competing priorities resulting in teams almost working against each other for extended periods of time because there is that lack of real transparency around what the priority is. And often that means being the decision maker, right? So that means jumping into these conversations and being like, well, we may have to disagree and commit on some things, or we may have to go down a certain path, not being 100% sure that this is going to work, but at least this way we can allocate our resources to a particular outcome instead of having conflicting priorities.
Yeah. Having clear, I guess, innovation priorities. So a lot of the time, these business goals will align to some sort of, business idea or innovation idea, and cloud allows you to build these things out quickly and then throw them away if they don't work. So you can experiment, do those innovations, and throw them out if they're not working. So that could be one of your, business objectives, to have a clear direction on a specific, improvement to a product or whatever it is, or improving a process, or many different, or changing a UI to be more efficient, or things like that. So testing out those innovation ideas is super, is a way that a lot of organisations start using cloud.
Totally. And I think when it comes to around the testing out ideas quickly, one thing that I like, and I've seen from a couple of different leaders that I've worked with in the past, is, when they get to that performance review time, one of the things that they expect their teams to produce is something that failed over the last, 6-12 months. Because I think if we're not identifying anything that failed or anything that didn't work in our innovation efforts, then what are we doing?
Are we learning anything?
This is it. Yeah. Like, often you see this, reel of, this is all the successes that we had over the last 6-12 months. But if we're not willing to be transparent about the failures, then are we truly innovating? I think it is an important question. And making that acceptable is really important as well. Like, let's be honest about things that didn't work, I think is a really great strategy and effective tool that I've seen leaders use. And it also helps their teams to be more honest about where there are issues, like, conflicting priorities, and that end up with us working against each other. It's like, well, if we can be really honest and transparent about that, we can resolve these issues a lot more quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, and that showcasing those, failures, but also successes, showcasing both of them and not hiding the failures away is super, super important, because everyone learns from that and improves. And whatever it is that caused the particular failure, as long as you have learnt from it and don't repeat that same mistake, then you're making progress.
Absolutely.
So the other area, another example business goal could be wanting to modernise your applications. You might have a lot of, applications that have been built so many years ago, with older technologies, older .NET versions, older operating systems. You're probably running out of patching. You're probably patching them, or you've run out of patches, or Microsoft aren't giving you patches anymore for your particular operating system. So being able to leverage the cloud to be able to do that, which usually involves some sort of migration up front. So you'll probably migrate the app first to get it into the new environment, which might be a re-platform with the new operating system and a new sort of modern database. And then you can sort of rebuild that app gradually, piece by piece. And then that's also another good way to, have a strategic objective around that. And then that way we'll talk about security in a minute, but that'll help your security posture incredibly as well, because you'll be up to date on all the libraries and all the other components that make up that application.
Yeah, and I think with relation to like things like modernization and migration, having more enterprise-wide targets for your various leaders can be really helpful in achieving those outcomes. Because obviously, and I know we spoke a little bit about this in episode 1, the first time that a lot of executives will engage with cloud is when they get that knock on the door about an application or something that they're using that needs to be migrated. And unless they are, supportive in that effort, it can make it really difficult for the teams trying to conduct the migrations, whether it's, a third party, like whether it's one of your big consulting companies or whatever the migration machine looks like. Having that level of cooperation is super critical. Otherwise, it just wastes time and money, right? And I think money being like a critical factor and something that really goes unseen, especially when you're perhaps using consultants to help bring in that knowledge, is the amount of money that gets spent spinning our wheels when trying to deal with, client side
Yes.
teams that are just not kind of understanding of the goal. Whereas if you've got all of your leaders on the same page about what needs to be done in terms of things like migration, in terms of things like modernization, then they can be in lockstep, they're incentivized to be in lockstep with each other about exactly what needs to be done.
And those having those incentives is important because everyone works on an incentive, and as long as your incentives are aligned with your strategic goals, you're going to have success. People like to, I guess you got to have the right incentives.
What do they say? What gets measured gets managed.
Yeah, that's true. So making sure everyone is aligned with those KPIs is super, super important.
Absolutely.
Let's move along to security, shall we? Risk assessment.
So risk assessment.
A good a question to ask your team, your leaders in your organisation, is around what are the potential risks and security concerns associated with moving to the cloud. So, as we discussed in the intro, there's data breaches all the time. A lot of organisations and verticals have compliance requirements, and you want to minimise downtime as well. So, discussing with your team strategies around mitigating these risks and ensuring data protection is critical, and asking these questions can help sort of unlock, areas that might need further work. So
totally.
So we can start with like the shared responsibility model. So all the cloud providers talk about shared responsibility all the time, but what actually does it mean?
What's shared responsibility, Matt? Tell me what shared responsibility is.
Shared responsibility is the cloud provider looking after, the layer that they provide you, so all the low-level things in the environment, and you have to look after everything that you deploy in that environment. So anything your organisation deploys is responsible for managing. So it's like, a two-layer cake. The bottom layer, the cloud provider is responsible for all the networking and hardware, and then the top layer is your part. So it gets a little bit more complicated in that around if you're using higher level services, there's less that you have to look after. Sometimes if you're using serverless, all you have to look after is the code you deploy. Mm-hmm. Everything else is patched for you. So the higher level services you use, the less you have to look after. And that shared responsibility becomes less and less as you go further up the stack, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of necessarily, because a lot of people stop at the EC2, the operating system level, but around using platform as a service and serverless and all those sorts of things takes a whole lot of that responsibility away from you.
And how is that different to on-prem, Matt? Like what is the shift that we need to make when we think about our security as an organization that has all of our infrastructure on-prem, all of our IT infrastructure on-premise as opposed to in the cloud? Like how do we have to think differently?
So on premises, you'll have to look after the every layer, including the all the networking devices, all the hypervisors. In your VMware, all your VMware servers. You've got to make sure they're all patched. You've got to cable everything. You've got to look after your data center, right? You have data center people, or you might have outsourced your data center either way, right? All those sorts of things you have teams looking after. But once you move into the cloud, those things go away. A lot of those things go away. And from a security perspective, you just have to worry about patching the things you deploy effectively. That's kind of the way to think about it. Anything you deploy, you have to look after. Encryption is super important. So there's two levels of encryption, right? There's the encryption around the data that's stored on the server, for example. So there's, I guess, encrypting the hard disk. That's one level. But then encrypting the data in the database or encrypting files on the file system is another layer. So you've got to think about, and not everyone thinks about that. They think it's, you put some data on S3, it's got an encryption key, it's encrypted. Well, yes, but if anyone who logs into that environment has that key, they can actually potentially look at that data. So making sure that only the right people with the keys can unlock that data and look at it, that's also important. Not just a matter of having it encrypted, but making sure only the right people.
Lowest level of access. Yeah.
Exactly right. Least privilege access is really important for everything, but especially around data encryption, and also especially when it's PII data. I mean, a lot of the data breaches these days would be non-event if all this data was encrypted. But apparently, not everyone is doing
Not speaking about any in particular.
No, not going to speak about anything, but everyone knows who we're talking about. There's also, so shifting left. So everyone, maybe you haven't heard the term shifting left.
What's shifting left, Matt? Tell me.
I'll explain what shifting left is. So that's effectively building security in at the very first step of deploying your application. So shifting left means I'm as far left as possible when I'm developing my app, and I'm building in my security as I build it. I'm taking advantage of my platform team who have built security in my deployment mechanisms, so I don't have to worry too much about it. All I have to worry about, again, certain levels are taken care of for me, but I have to worry about making sure that I've set up least privilege for my application from a user perspective and a network perspective. Only the things that be able to talk to my system should be able to talk to it, and making sure I encrypt my data. So that, making sure that all those guardrails and all those compliance and all those standards that your organisation uses are covered when you deploy code. So asking your teams about shifting left, super important. Are you waiting till the end to get security added in? Well, usually that's the wrong answer if you're getting that sort of an answer, because it's brushed if it's at the end and it's not built into your process, and it means if you have to redeploy it, you have to redo that whole process again. And if you get a checklist that you've got to tick every time, that's not agile and it's not easily repeatable. So
I think as well as that, when it comes to security, I do think there's an element of making it visible as well for our organizations and our teams, because obviously there's and when we talk about security, there's a range of different things that come up, like physical security of our offices or whatever it might be. But I think making sure that we have that all types of security really visible to our teams, and different at various levels, like a customized approach. One thing that one organization I worked with a few years ago, they actually implemented a course for all of their large organizations. They implemented a course for all of their, and it was like an hour-long workshop for all of their teams to talk about security specifically for executive assistants. And it was just so well delivered. And I think that sort of stuff is a great way to really reinforce the requirement, not only to our IT teams, but also to the whole organization, to be thinking as we go about our work day to day, how are we implementing security as job zero? And especially as, as technology progresses and we talk about the move to cloud as the change from more traditional IT operations to a product development team or a product development pipeline, how do we make sure that all those people that are involved, whether it be, like a product manager roles or the SME of a particular area, how are they helping to reinforce that culture of security as job zero, especially as development moves, potentially in the next few years, development moves outside of IT operations, and then we have a big challenge. So how are we putting in place the right processes to make sure that we have security from day one as a foundation?
And the last piece around security I'll say is asking the question around your firewalls and your system, your inspection capability, making sure that they are automated and there's no manual processes to get all that done. There's no excuse. These days, any of those firewalls that you deploy have full automation. There's no excuse for not taking advantage of that and having a lean process for people to get rules in and get that access out, because a lot of that slows down the pace of the value that the business gets from cloud if those have manual processes. You can talk about costs. Questions to ask your team around how we can optimize costs in the cloud. There's lots of different things that we can do around costs. So cost monitoring and budgeting and forecasting strategies are key areas in this sort of space. Budget alarms. All cloud providers pretty much provide a way of doing budget alarms. Making sure they're in place stops any surprises, and people get surprises sometimes when they're using cloud, especially.
And making sure they're going to the right people, Matt.
Oh yeah, you've got to have the alarm going to the right
Making sure they're not going to someone that's on, extended personal leave, because that's not helpful.
That's right.
Just be checking these things, make sure there's like a reasonable spread of people being alerted if something's going over budget.
And as most alarms are, don't have it too low where everyone ignores it every time they see it. So it's got to be a realistic number, otherwise it'll probably go to the bin.
Yeah, well, this is true as well. We don't want to oversensitize people to it. We don't want to desensitize people to those sort of triggers. So that's really important as well. Probably something to visit in quarterly finance reviews are those budgets at the right level? Because if you're going over them every month, then I think you're going to find that they're not really having any impact.
Yeah. Asking your teams if they can break down your cloud spend by business stream or workload. That's one of the benefits of being able to be in cloud, right? Being able to have that visibility and where you're spending your operational budgets on, which part of the business. I think that's pretty powerful, and I think a lot of CFOs, when they realise they can do this, gives them a lot of insight on where they're spending their money and maybe where they're going to be investing their money as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have a plan to get to this point where you are using a chargeback model to hold everyone accountable, so everyone's just not pointing the finger at IT. Otherwise, I think you're going to struggle to keep a handle on costs for something that should be cost effective if you're not holding the right people accountable for those costs. And then, from a leadership perspective, if we're using technology as our key delivery arm, which it should be for most executives, right? We need to understand how much it costs. And that might involve an element of upskilling and learning as well.
Yeah, sometimes sometimes organisations start with showback because it's a whole
Yes.
new world.
Yes, it
But
is.
but pivoting to chargeback is something that comes with a bit of maturity if you're not doing chargeback today. But it is something that we highly recommend that you do.
Yeah, show back at a minimum. And I think it's okay to also like I know there was an article we were reading a couple of weeks ago, Matt, about lack of transparency in terms of cloud spend, and like non-IT executives expressing that they just weren't able to get the visibility. And I think there's a couple of things there. I think, we need to make it acceptable that, it does take time to work through these things to make sure that we do have the right mechanisms in place, and we are, tagging all the different assets correctly. And I know that can be challenging given that some assets are shared between different parts of the business, right? So that there are these considerations as well. And it does take time to to untangle all of this at a like executive level. But I think as leaders, as executive leaders, we need to be okay with being like, okay, we don't necessarily have the answers to this right now, but this is what we do know, and this is what we're working towards, i.e. either, like a really clear and concise show back, or, ideally charge back for everything. But I think we need to make it acceptable that there are things that we are working through that we may not have a handle on just yet, but it's important that we have a level of transparency to know that we don't know, and it's something that we need to work through. And then also, I do think that finance and executives collectively, if there are things that you're going to be charged for, which I think from what most of our listeners would be yes, then understanding, cloud fundamentals at a minimum, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And your tech teams have a cloud. The way they build their apps is directly proportional to that cost. So there's expensive ways to build apps, and there's cheaper ways to build apps. Your teams need to know the difference, and usually using the higher level abstracted services make this sort of thing cheaper in general, not always, but as a first port of call. And it's also less effort to use those high level platform services. So asking your teams, are they building things the right way? If you see costs that look out of the ordinary, then that's a good question to ask.
And I think as well as that, don't be afraid to reach out to your cloud provider, because for the most part, your organization will have an allocated person that can help you with these things if you do need assistance. And a lot of organizations are new to this. So if you do need to reach out to your, AWS account team or your GCP or Azure, you're not alone.
Yeah, and
this is like a lot of the things they do on a day-to-day basis is helping companies to manage cost.
Yeah, and if you're a small organisation and you have an accident, they are always more than willing. I'll speak on their behalf because I know they're more than willing to help. Help with an accident and clean it up. And, as long as you don't do it again. Skills, Georgia. Are skills important?
I think we've the fact that we've gone through 3 different questions and we've spoken about skills in every single one of them. So
I think they are.
Yes, I think so.
I guess the main thing around skills is it covers every facet of your journey to cloud, and having the key thing that is sometimes missed is that all your leadership and all your management teams should be trained in the cloud fundamentals. All cloud providers provide options. There's Azure fundamentals on the Microsoft side. There's cloud practitioner on the AWS side. I don't know what the GCP one is, but I'm sure they've got something which
Even
covers those fundamentals.
even the one below actual certification, Matt, I think is really valuable. Like especially for, you know, non-technical teams, where we might have like potential like product leaders having an understanding of how cloud works. Because again, and like I've seen this multiple times or many times, is, you know, organizations and teams trying to use like design thinking, for example, to come up with better solutions to service their customers, which is great. And I think design thinking is an amazing tool. However, if the individuals do not understand how technology can be utilized, if they don't have a basic understanding of things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, then they really have no way of applying it. And therefore it kind of makes that design thinking process a bit futile, because it's like, oh, well, you know, we can't really come up with effective solutions using technology because we actually don't really understand how the technology works. And really, you know, it's one thing to be asking your tech team to come up with solutions. And sometimes they come up with amazing solutions, right? But it is best if those solutions can come from the people that are subject matters in the areas of the customers that they are serving, whether it's internally or externally.
Yeah, that's for sure. Having that understanding definitely will help building this, thinking about what they actually want to build, and getting and asking the right questions to be able to make sure the right thing is designed and built. So
I do think having, at a minimum, as organizations move towards migration, like especially when they're, you know, getting into their migration journey, getting really stuck into the bulk of it, is getting a percentage, aiming to have a percentage of your entire organization having gone through cloud fundamentals. Just because it's going to help inspire that journey. Again, if they don't understand how the technology works, then it's really difficult for people to come up with innovative solutions to help serve your customers better.
Yep, and a lot of organisations gamify it as well. So, you know, especially the technical teams, they like a bit of competition between themselves. So, a lot of people like to get multiple certs. And then the cloud providers, a lot of the time, they'll help you with merch and T-shirts. You can have, you know, co-branded T-shirts, all those sorts of things. Cloud providers love having customers getting trained in their technology, because they know it'll get used a hell of a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, like where there's opportunities for immersion days or whatever it might be for your technical teams and for your leaders, I think absolutely take the opportunity, because it's just so valuable. And obviously, for the most part, as per my understanding, most of that stuff is free. So it's just an amazing value add to your organization.
Yeah, for sure. Last item is operational excellence. And I'd say it's one of them. Also, you know, they're all important, but this is probably one of the most important. The questions you need to ask, you know, how will our operational processes need to change as we adapt to a cloud operating model? You've got to consider the things like, you know, automation, DevOps practices, continuous integration and continuous deployment. So there's a lot of words there. Continuous integration is about making sure your applications are always committed to a code repo somewhere. It's like a backup, you know. Your teams need to commit that somewhere. And then continuous deployment is about automating your deployments effectively. That's all it is. So things that you might not have done previously become super easy in the cloud world. The data center did not provide an easy way to consistently do that across your environment. You know, for a dev environment, it was not unusual, you know, to wait months for... I've had customers back in, you know, many years ago who waited months for hardware to be delivered. Stacked.
It's unreal.
Racked. Cabled. And
It's
then
such
you
a
have
crazy thought now that we would have to wait for that sort of stuff.
you had to fill out. I remember you had to fill out spreadsheets of where this cable needs to go to this
Oh gosh.
port. So you had teams for a large customer that I had to deal with that had to fill out these spreadsheets, and that was their job. Like they did that every day. Cable.
I don't think we need those people anymore.
No, a lot of that is taken care of. So that's the shared responsibility. Your cloud provider has taken that away from you, so you don't have to fill out those spreadsheets. There's still spreadsheets for other things, I'm sure, but not for cable matrices and things like that. Mature. I guess asking questions about your release times, right? So how quickly, when your business demands a change to your application, can it get deployed in production? Are we talking, months, like it used to be, or is it weeks, or is it days, or is it hours? And sometimes a lot of organisations deploy, multiple times an hour. So within minutes.
Wow.
So it's a maturity curve, right?
Absolutely. I think it's a good indicator for like how mature we are as an organisation when it comes to using cloud. And the key drivers behind those timelines, like what is if we're saying that things are going to take weeks, what are the key dependencies that are causing our deployments to take weeks?
Breaking that down is, even if you have to take the teams through a workshop to figure out what's taking so long, you've got to find those large times, and it might just be a simple matter of adding in some basic DevOps practices to automate some tasks, or you might still have some siloed teams who don't actually have a way to communicate, who need meetings to communicate with each other. Automate those interactions somehow. Smash the teams together. Sometimes it's a matter of smashing the teams together just to make sure they talk, put them in the same room, and figure out how they can optimize those processes. So team interaction is super, super important around operational excellence. And one that I see all the time is lengthy architecture approvals for new services. So a lot of the time organisations took big long checklists to introduce new technologies into an organisation's cloud. You might do that once via cloud provider, but you shouldn't be doing it for every service that needs to be onboarded. You should have you have a security governance process possibly for the services, but you don't need formal approval processes to be able to onboard different parts of just a single cloud provider. That doesn't make any sense. And the design documents for when you're deploying applications, they shouldn't be super long or complex, 50, 60 page documents anymore, because a lot of the things that used to be in those documents, you don't really need to do anymore. So I think organisations sometimes have a they find it hard to have a mental shift between the way they used to do things and the way they can do things now. So smaller, just-in-time designs are a lot more important, a lot more efficient to be able to actually get things done, because even if you make the wrong decision, sometimes you can go back, and the AWS have a term for that. One-way door versus two-way door. So a one-way door is a decision you have to think about, a lot, because it's really hard to reverse. Two-way door decisions, well, it means that you can go one way, and if it doesn't work, you can go back and try another way. So when your teams are deploying apps, make sure that they're thinking about what sorts of... Are they spending too long on two-way door decisions? Get them to just really think about those things and make sure that they're spending time on the right sorts of things, and have a bias for action among your teams to get things built and deployed.
And I think as well as that, like when we talk about, people change, like in relation, when we talk about going from an old way of working or like a on-prem, I call it an on-prem way of thinking versus a cloud way of thinking. I do think that, giving your people like a clear view of the changes that you are expecting to make as an organization is really important, so they can make some decisions for themselves. And, ideally for larger organizations where there's the opportunity to help get people skilled in cloud, and obviously, bring in skills to help you get started, whether it's a partner or hiring externally or whatever that might be. I think it's important to try our best to support people to get skilled if they want to. And if they don't, well, obviously from an on-prem perspective, generally there's going to be a kind of end of the line for people. So I think it's important to be clear and transparent about that as well, but to give people support to make the changes that you want to make as an organization is really critical. Otherwise, you're just going to face a lot of resistance.
Yeah, that's right. And then nothing happens overnight, right? So it's a longish process, and people have time to sort of make their decisions, and you need to also, as a leader in your organisation, be clear on where the organisation's going, and make sure you provide the support to your teams to partake in that journey or not, as the case may be.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about a whole lot of stuff there, Georgia. 5 different sort of areas to ask questions on. What do you think is, in closing, what do you think is most important, do you think, from your perspective?
I think a lot of it is about being curious as leaders as we work with our teams. Like, how else can we help them to make the transition as seamlessly as possible, and to get the most out of it. And sometimes that means diving into the details, like, when we talk about priorities, well, sometimes we might have to do things like disagree and commit. And just being able to really, lead by example in that way, I think is really important.
And asking, so my key takeaway is the whole premise of this episode is
Mindset
and asking questions of your leaders. It's about showing interest in what everyone's doing.
And being invested, right?
Yeah, being invested in the outcomes, and it's not about catching people out. It's about being there, being present. It's about making everyone think, are we getting our best value out of this, and how can we improve, and what are we missing out on? So
absolutely,
they're the outcomes that I think people should take away from this. We've just sort of skimmed the surface on a whole bunch of important areas, but asking these questions and educating yourself and making sure your teams are educated, super important, especially when you're new to cloud. It's a long journey, but show an interest is probably my summary.
Absolutely.
So that's the end. How can people contact us, Georgia? Do you remember the email address?
Yes, feedback@cloud-dialogues.com. That will come directly to us. Alternatively, obviously hit up our website, cloud-dialogues.com, and you can go through to the Google Sheet. As always, we love to hear your ideas about potential sessions. I know we've had a bunch of requests to talk about generative AI. So
that might be coming soon.
It might be coming soon. But yeah, as always, we love to hear your ideas. Please tell us what you want to hear about. Hopefully it's useful.
Thanks, Georgia. I'll see you in a fortnight, and I'll see you all in a fortnight.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.